panelists have shown will continue this conversation for us for a long period of time. I'm Gayatri and I'm your host. Quickly is that if we could put your mobiles on silent and also kind of leave the sidebar conversations so that we can listen to the charcha that's going to happen with amazing panelists. If you need any assistance, people with the charcha t-shirt are throughout with you. And there's a QR code at the back of the agenda. And at any point of time, it can be logged in multiple times. So if you have any feedback about a session or anywhere, there's also this QR code in different standees. Keep giving us the feedback. And if you have any questions for the panel, there'll be a QR code and the menti.com. We will take the questions and hand over your questions to the moderator. So back to the session. We are especially delighted to have TechnoServe as the co-hosts this year. And all of us know that 86% of farmers in India are small and marginal farmers with less than 2 hectares of land, 1 hectare of land. And around 46% of India's workforce is agri and related sector. So it's such a majority, right? Like we're talking almost a huge population, that it's a population scale solution that we're talking about. Every intention has to be designed to address this particular population. So it's a very pertinent topic, and I'm as curious as you to understand how this is going to be addressed. We have an amazing lineup of panelists today. We have with us Dipanwita Chakraborty. Dipanwita leads Cargill's corporate social responsibility and sustainable development efforts across Asia-Pacific region, focusing on global WASH initiatives. We have with us Nishant Gupta, Head of Sustainability, Flipkart Group, Social and Environment Impact Advisor, Walmart. So you can keep occupying the dais. We also have with us Chetna Gala Sinha, Founder and Chairperson, Man Deshi Bank and Man Deshi Foundation. The bank drives empowerment for rural women and holistic community development. We have with us Aparna Bijapurkar, Managing Director and Partner, BCG. Aparna co-leads BCG's agriculture and rural development work, collaborating with a wide range of stakeholders to drive impact across the value chain. And moderating this amazing channel, the panel discussion for the day is Krishnan Hariharan, Senior Practice Leader, TechnoServe. Krishnan oversees TechnoServe India's agriculture portfolio, guiding both program implementation and design to ensure strategic operations successes. Over to you, Krishnan, for a great panel.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. As we said, it's day 3, and it's a fully packed hall. So even though the title of the session is Farming the Future, I will assume with everyone crowding here that we do understand farming is the future. And the importance and the criticality is what we are going to try to solve a little bit here. It's a privilege for me to have these particular panelists because all of them do put sustaining livelihoods and the income of smallholding farmers at the center, along with inclusivity. They just come at it a little differently, and I think they will be able to talk about the different pathways that are required for us to really think about farming the future. I don't want to take too much time, but I will just reference in the early plenary session, a couple of things that stood out was we have over 650 million people living in villages in India. Again, large amount smallholding farmers. And I think from Pradhan's perspective, Mahajan sir did say India does have the ability to not just feed itself, but even feed the world. But for some of us who work in implementation, we are clearly seeing that that isn't such a given truth anymore. Soil, we've talked about, climate change and its impact, and of course, what that means to a farmer is going to continue to get more and more challenging. So what I will implore everybody here is really be thinking about how do you do any work in agriculture without those two things at the center of how we look at the issues. So let me jump right in. I'll start with Dipanwita. Primarily because from a corporate perspective, we know how important sustainable sourcing and the smallholding farmer is. Cargill, being one of the largest corporations in the world, has actually started to undertake very ambitious sustainable supply chain projects, and regenerative agriculture. So my question really for Dipanwita is, from a corporate lens, what is the economic viability of regenerative agriculture for a smallholding farmer? Because we know if it's done right, of course, soil improves, yield, everything goes up. But it is a challenge to make the smallholding farmer change their behavior. They're already the hardest working group that we know of. Now we're telling them, do a little bit more and don't take the easy pathways, which we had already offered. So from your perspective, what do you see as the business case that will ensure long-term sustainability, and a little bit about the program you're currently implementing in Karnataka with us, of course?
Sure, thank you, Krishnan, and very grateful to be part of this great panel, and hello, everybody. This topic is very, very pertinent. We are sitting at a place where we cannot ignore the intersection of how the food systems operate and the market systems operate with the intersectionality of climate change that we are all in the middle of right now, right? We all know about temperature changes. We have seen how Delhi was heated up this summer. We are seeing rain disruptions, and all of that is really contributing factor for how the future will look like for farming, but also what we need to think about at this point in time. And it's not an easy lift for anyone in this room, but probably for all of us to think about together as to how could a collective come together to make things happen. And I'm including corporates, private sector, government, and all of you in the room as well, because that's where the food comes from. We're talking about India becoming a food basket of the world. The potential that we have been seeing with our food crops and grains, but it's not an easy thing to happen, right? I do want to allude to the fact that for the food system to change and transform, the way all of us look at the farming ecosystem has to make a massive shift. It has started to shift already, but there is a need to look at it from a more pragmatic lens for sure, and also from a long-term lens, because a short-term gain of tomorrow is not really going to get us into the climate conversations that we are all really worried about, but I think we're also grappling with the question of how do we really tackle that. So in terms of getting into a bit of a approach conversation, right, and it is directly related to how the farmer will, of course, grow the crop, but then also how will it impact the farm income, because that's where the proof of the pudding lies, right? That is where the evidence lies for how it can create a more equitable and more inclusive as well as more viable future for those involved. And I want to talk about three things here, and as we have navigated through conversations, doing research, pilots across the world, especially when we started off with regenerative agriculture in North America, and we made a commitment to impact 10 million acres of farmland to be brought under regenerative agriculture. Some of the things that we learned were about trust, transparency, and credibility. These three factors play such a massive role as we work with farmers, of course, but also with the downstream customers. And that becomes really the key factors from, as you know, we have data, we have market research. We also have been doing pilots to inform some of these practices and some of the realities that we can get into. But when it comes to a farmer facing barriers with, soil health, why would the farmer want to adopt practices, and what is the economic viability to it? So if you're not answering those questions, and the other part of it is about the uniqueness of each farmer. I'm not talking about farmers across the world, but even if we take a geography, for example, we're working in Karnataka, and I've had the chance to visit the farm myself as well. And each farmer is so different. And it's, again, as organization, as a corporate, as private sector players, etc., sometimes it's important for us to be there, be in their shoes, and really understand what their issues are and where that is lending, as it relates to, again, trust, transparency, and credibility, to be able to solve for some of those. We would want them to adopt great soil health practices, right? We would want them to restore and reduce water usage. We would want them to sequester carbon and participate in carbon programs. But how? What is it that they, I mean, those do not get solved in boardrooms. I want to just bring that point here to the fore, that they have to be done where the proof of the pudding is, and that's the farmland. And the other aspect of it is the reality also is that, where if the farmer is not earning enough income, then the downstream doesn't work. And who incentivizes that? I mean, it's like a bit of a concoction, I think, that we are all dealing with, and it's I would say, take the liberty to say that it's a bit of a messy middle. I'll come to some of the solution-driven things that we are doing probably in the second half of it, but I want to just pause here and just say that it actually takes a lot of collaboration and patience and some amount of understanding of resourcing it from a long-term perspective for it to become a viable option, and also make it inclusive, because women farmers are a big player in the question, who get oftentimes excluded and ignored in the equation, but we have seen results while working with them over the years of how they bring a massive impact, and they're great adopters as well. Thanks, Krishnan.
Thank you. And also with Cargill, and this is a good segue into Nishant also, what's interesting is having scale built into design. These are not small programs. This is 10,000 farming households in Karnataka. So for Walmart, it's 30,000 smallholding farmers in just one example, which is ours. But as an organization, as a foundation, Walmart has always understood that if you don't start thinking scale, then the idea for them to actually see towards the future becomes a lot harder. So in that regard, we've had the ability and the privilege to work with Walmart for quite a while here. And one of the things that has remained important to Walmart is collectivization of farmers, the FPC model. And it has always been seen as one of the strongest pathways for access to market, access to finance, even agronomy. And for over that, then you include gender and livelihoods as well. In the future, given what you're seeing across all the programs in India at least, and with the impact of climate, do you still see collectivization not just being important, but having to evolve in a particular new way, so that we can actually start moving even more across what your impact is looking like?
So first of all, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for having me here. Good to see a packed room for this conversation. So to address the first part of your question, right, is collectivization important? Of course it is important, right? With an average land holding of less than 2 hectares, there is no chance that a smallholder farmer has a voice on the table, neither for input nor for output. The economies of scale don't work. The cost of logistics becomes prohibitive, and anybody who's worked in agriculture, this problem has remained for decades, if not centuries, right? And the farmland sizes are just shrinking as we move further, and there is possibly no other solution but to collectivize in whatever shape and format. And in the current context, FPOs are the best bet, and we have been working on it for the last 5-6 years now. Very focused on figuring out what makes an FPC click, what makes FPO successful, right? And of course, there is a theoretical explanation of what makes it click, which is aggregation. And it's not just theoretical, it's actually practical. You have aggregation of demand, you have aggregation of supply, which is available to the FPC, and then FPC or FPO acts as a bridge between the smallholder farmers and the markets. And this bridge doesn't just work for purchase and sale, this bridge works for pretty much everything under the sun. This bridge works for advisory distribution. This bridge works for capacity development. This bridge works for, of course, the collectivization of input demand as well as output supply. And I do think that given the thousands, and I believe the current number is more than 40,000 FPOs which are registered in the country, the need is now to make as many of them successful and sustainable, right? So we remain committed to making them successful. Last year, we did make a commitment to reach about 1 million farmers by 2028, and more than half of them being women. And just taking a cue from what Dipanwita just mentioned, and just elaborating a little more on that, more than 70% of the rural workforce comes, is women. More than 70% of the women workforce also is rural, right? So women farmers are perhaps the largest workforce that actually exists. And they're the closest to the farm, right? We also did some activity work stream assessment to say that more often than not, in most of the value chains, women farmers are doing the maximum amount of work in any value chain, right? So involving them is not just a conversation about social justice. It is also economically more wise to involve women at every step of the conversation in farming, even in FPOs. And we have ourselves noticed that whenever women are part of the decision making, both at the farm as well as the collective level, the outcomes, including the economic outcomes, have been superbly much better, right? So be it cropping intensity, be it any adoption of new technology or new technique, be it cropping diversity, be it even climate smart agriculture. We have seen that the outcomes are far superior when women are at the table at every level. So for us, the design of any programs makes it inevitable that women have to be included at all times. So for us, gender is not just about involving women, but also about giving agency to women to make the right decisions, because to be honest, they are the best judge of what needs to be done at the farm.
Thank you. And I think we'll touch into gender a little bit more as we go there. But I think specifically to the point on design, in any program that we try to work with at scale, the design around gender has to also be much more meaningful. It's not a number. But since we're talking about scale and also sustainability, I will now turn to Aparna, because what we need to understand a little bit more for the farming of the future is, if regenerative agriculture, sustainable sourcing, better soil, all of that are going to be part of how farmers will operate moving ahead, irrespective if there's a TechnoServe, if there's a Walmart, Cargill. For that to happen, could you talk a little bit about the overall ecosystem that needs to be leveraged for those things to be sustainable, accessible, and among the stakeholders, be it government or corporate, how do you see that being played out?
Yeah, no, thanks so much for that question. And I think we have the privilege of having the vantage point of really working with a lot of the ecosystem, given what we do. And I think as I was listening to your opening, as well as Dipanwita and Nishant, when we think about farming the future, I guess the future is going to entail very large-scale shifts, right? Whether it is a shift in terms of what we farm and this whole push for crop diversification, whether it is a shift in terms of what we need to be able to do to meet export requirements and standards, whether it is a shift, to be able to do both we talk about people positive, planet positive, the regenerative shift. And I think it is a large-scale, transformation of the farming system that I think we're expecting a set of, very small, fragmented individual farmers to make, right? And I think at least the work that we do, we have discovered that, it is very critical at this point in time for the ecosystem to come together, and this will not happen unless we're all able to collaborate. And if I just describe, who that ecosystem perhaps should be, right? And I think at least what we're finding. I think one, and especially in the context of regenerative agriculture, but even maybe crop diversification, I think is the research ecosystem, right? And I think we don't perhaps talk about it enough, and it's nice to see the budget is, has put something out on research and extension. But I think even just being, if I asked everybody in this room, what do you describe as regenerative agriculture? I think we'll all agree that it is about soil health and water conservation and some of those outcomes. But the nature of practices that constitute regenerative and what makes sense in the middle of Madhya Pradesh in a fairly arid, unirrigated area versus what makes sense in Karnataka and a coffee supply chain is very, very different, right? And I think being able to start with saying, what are the practices and in what agroecological zones do they make sense? And I think link that to also what is viable, right? Because, for example, not in the context of regen, but in Punjab, we had colleagues who were working on crop diversification. And I think if you look block by block at what the opportunity to diversify out of a paddy wheat cycle is, that answer changes from Hoshiarpur, where maybe now you're seeing soya and agroforestry, to the Mansa belt, where you're seeing maybe cotton and some of that, right? So I think the research ecosystem needs to be activated, and not just upstream, but in terms of being able to then, get that advisory down to the farm level and think about it both pragmatically, as Dipanwita said, to say impact on resources, but also impact on incomes and viability, right? I think the second part is this advisory and extension network, and many people in this room, and you talked about Pradhan, really work on that. And I think I was reflecting, on what's happening in Andhra Pradesh with this natural farming movement, right? And I think a lot of science, needs to be built around it. But you see that that movement is built on the back of women, and it's built on the back of the self-help group network, and it's really built on the back of a very deep hand-holding and advisory ecosystem, right? And I think that really needs to come, to take the research and the science and the good practices down to farm level. And I think expecting that to happen, this transition to happen without some digital plus physical interface for the farmer, I think is tough. I think the third part of the ecosystem that's super critical is the off-takers, and we have, two of them on this panel. But I think if viability has to be at the heart of any future of farming, I think you need to be able to reward the farmer for making that, transition. And I think if you look at regen ag, at least the science that I have seen says up to 3 years, there is likely to be some loss of yield. And if practices are not done in the perfect way, that could even extend further, right? So who's going to pay for that? And hopefully the consumer will, and hopefully off-takers will. But if not, then at least there is, the carbon market that maybe we can activate. So I think bringing that ecosystem to facilitate the transition will be critical. And then I think a lot of this requires very different kinds of inputs and resources, right? We talk about, bio input centers that need to be set up. We talk about supply chains that need to look very different. So I think to answer your question, that's what the ecosystem looks like. But unfortunately, all of it has to come together in a place-based approach at the same time for any of this transition to happen. And we're not seeing that outside of islands of excellence. So to the last stakeholder, what can the government do? I mean, I think a few things. The government, we don't talk enough about it on panels like this, but perhaps I think there is a lot of policy distortion, and I think some of that really, we need to, work with the government to say how do we actually move the needle. There are some interesting schemes like PM Pranam, etc., maybe that can come to bear. But I think the last is, can the government do two things, which is one is convergence of a lot of the schemes that exist, right? I mean, you see micro-irrigation sitting somewhere, you see, fertilizer subsidy sitting somewhere else. So can you have convergence to be able to let this ecosystem access money much more effectively? I think that would be very good. And I think the second is, can we have the government invest behind a set of lighthouse projects? A lot of this will have some risk, some innovation. So them with the development ecosystem, maybe we can build a few lighthouses that can then scale up.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we'll sort of unpack some of this a little later, because it's pretty critical to understand that having the stakeholders kind of know their roles but work with each other, leveraging each other, will allow any program to be eventually sustainable and we exit. And now I'll turn to Chetna. I think among all of us here, I'm always most nervous when I have to ask Chetna any questions, because I've rarely met someone who's that grounded with the community. We have the privilege of working on projects, but we're not seeing it on a day-to-day basis. So specifically with gender, for inclusivity, the question is that we all recognize women face multi-layered challenges, be it climate change, access to finance, access to markets, even from a knowledge perspective. And yet they're also burdened in agriculture with doing a lot of the work. Pre and post-harvest, most of it is women. But access to land ownership, all of this is there. So particularly from a scale perspective and ensuring gender isn't managed at a very superficial level, deeper, how can access to finance be facilitated more effectively for smallholder women farmers? And a little bit to even Nishant's point, does that also need to have a collectivization model? Just because we know the success in self-help groups, we'll take it from there.
Thanks. Krishnan, actually, when you said that you are nervous, when I go to women, either where they are doing their business, selling vegetables or doing farming, I get nervous also with there because I would, and I'll just start with like how, I'm seeing here the room packed with the people before the lunch, right? And you feel so happy that, you know, farming, agriculture, Bharat, rural India, so much of interest, right, in the same way. You go into the village, and if it is a packed room with the young second generation who are in farming, and ask the question, how many of you want to do farming like your dad or mom did? And they will say, we have not come here to hear that. We want to get out of it. So it's nothing new. But what I'm trying to say is that many times just happens that we have to say something, but we fail to listen what opposite person wants to say, right? And I'll share with you about this whole microfinance thing which you asked about, that how do we address the women farmers who have marginal lands and address their needs on scale. So actually, I'll narrate one of my experience with one of the women who was growing vegetables, selling vegetables on the street in the weekly market, knew everything about banking, though she had not gone to the school, Parvati. She was saving with Mandeshi Bank. And I saw her taking loan from moneylender. So I asked Parvati that you are saving with Mandeshi Bank. So there's no question of awareness. She knows, like, she has a saving account, she comes to the bank, or we have a doorstep banking. So then I said, why are you taking loan from moneylender? Do you know how much interest you are repaying? She said, I know. 10% a day, I know that. I've not been to the school, but I know how to do calculations. So then, and she said 110% a month. So it was very interesting to hear her. I mean, very shocking, not interesting, but that she knows everything. And then she says that I am standing selling vegetables. It is 48 degrees Celsius. Don't waste my time. I want to do my business and go back home. And that was the time when we realized that we do microcredit. We feel so proud about it. We talk about 98% repayment. But we have to come out from our comfort zone and listen to them and design the credit product according to their needs. And then we designed the overdraft facility for women street vendors and then she said that why I'm taking loan from moneylenders? Because I want loan in morning and I want to repay whatever money I get in evening. So you don't give that. You are talking about weekly repayment, monthly repayment, which we don't want. You are talking about groups, we want individual loans. So that, and after listening to that, we designed this overdraft facility for individual women farmer, where whenever she needs money, she gets the loan, she repays, and yes, she is going to repay with interest. And I'm so proud to share with you that Pradhan Mantri Swanidhi Yojana for street vendors, which has come up, is based on that, because that research was done by NABARD, GIZ, and Mandeshi. So that is where these women, and today, when this policy came, so actually every street vendor in weekly market is entitled to this 10,000 immediate loan, where she can get it and she can repay it in a form of cash credit. So why can't we scale? We can also scale, because this doorstep banking also create employment for these bank sakhis. While sharing this example, what did I learn? As you mentioned, Dipanwita, that collaboration, patience. Yes, it is very important for the farmers. Listening, very important for us to do, because our schools, MBA, finance, we are not used to listen. But farming, soil, agriculture, everywhere, by touching also you listen, by looking at it also you listen, by harvesting also you listen. So you have to learn from them how to listen to them. And when you listen to them, then you realize, and I realized that, while doing banking with microcredit and all, which was great, and we have $60 billion industry, but we have not graduated because we have failed to listen. And so these women taught me that never give poor solutions to poor people. They are smart. These women on the street are doing digital banking. They are doing finding on YouTube where to sell it. Everything they do it. And still, why moneylender can do the business? The failure is on supply side, not on the demand side, right? Banking sector has failed, and that's why. So I think it is very important that scale also will come from the mainstream banking sector. And I would just say that, innovation in product for designing the credit product for farmers, for marginal farmers, understanding the cash flow, listening their repayments and listen to them, and innovation in process. I think that is also equally important. Reach to them. Don't think that because they want money, they will come to you. They are not going to come to you. And that's why moneylender reaches them. So I think it is important to learn these lessons. And about, I will talk about collectivization, as you mentioned, that FPOs and all, because those things are very important. For what do we need collectivization and FPOs? For the things, शहर से तो गांव में बहुत कुछ आता है, और उसका FPOs का फायदा लोगों को मिलता है. कुछ भी खरीदना है तो you get thousands clients, right? But गांव से जो शहर में जाना है बाहर, वहाँ collectivization is very important, because that is going to give money to the farmers. So I'll talk about those. We have receipt financing, warehouse, cold storages, and soil and water testing. I'll talk it about later. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that. And I do think there is a slight inability in the development sector to listen always, because we come at it with the idea we have solutions and this top-down approach, but really understanding that the community you're working with are the ones. But since innovation and taking chances is really important as we think about farming the future, for Dipanwita, if you can talk a little bit about, in the current Regen project, Shrishti, which was sort of co-designed, we had thought of it, there are some very unique things there that it's patient capital for 4 years to understand. It isn't on a very quick level. There's no offtake. Cargill, even though they buy maize in this project for the 10,000 households, there's no offtake. It is purely looking at regenerative agricultural practices. And as critical as it is, from Cargill's side, to have a scorecard that is kind of going through each regen practice and identifying what's the burden on the farmer. If you can just talk a little bit about that here.
Yeah, thanks, Krishnan. And Chetna, ma'am, what you said was so pertinent, and I'm reflecting on a lot of things as I heard you. Thank you so much for those points. So diving a little bit into the program that Krishnan alluded to, that we partner with TechnoServe on, is called Shrishti. A bit of a context, it's, Cargill has corn wet milling facility in Davangere in Karnataka, and we have been working with farmers, maize farmers in that belt for a while now, and we have been off-takers as well. And we were actually, as we were looking at the regenerative agriculture ecosystem, and as we were activating it across North America and parts of Australia, and we were looking at how it is shaping up in this part of the world, the first thing that we thought about was that we needed to be bold, because we didn't have any reference points. We certainly don't have reference points. Even now, we are trying to build reference points through this program. context, I mean, of course, I think most of the people in the room would know that Karnataka is highly rain-fed as it relates to the agriculture ecosystem. There are marginal farmers, and it's also one of the largest producers of maize in the country. Having said that, the issues being faced, again, at the farm level, and especially when it relates to changing behaviors and habits to shift to regenerative, is an entire gamut of kind of issue management in itself, right? And as we sat across the table and we said, we need to be really bold in how we go after it. So we wanted to do scale. So we are looking at impacting 10,000 farming households, 25,000 acres of farmland under regenerative agriculture, restoring about 75 million liters of water and 100,000 metric ton of carbon through this program. And we went into it not knowing much. We are learning now, and we're learning together, and we are also bringing people along in the journey. One of the first things, and I'm very glad that Krishnan and team, they put this together, and we said, the women in those farming households can be our first sort of people that we have our touch point in, and it is paying off. That's what we have seen in the recent past, that we have been interacting with them or seeing some of the reports coming up. The other thing that we have done as part of the program is to make it very outcome-based, because we wanted to hold ourselves accountable and also the people who are in this conversation very accountable for how this pans. It's a four-year project, right? But we wanted to see what works when we talk about soil health, when we talk about water, when we talk about adoption of innovative practices like drip irrigation, biofertilizers, whatsoever. How does it pan out? So we have got a bit of an experimenting mindset as well to be able to resource some of these conversations, because again, it's about reaching the farmer and listening to them where they are, right? And that was a very, not an easy thing to do for a corporate as well, I have to tell you that much, because we are, like Chetna ma'am said, right? We want fast results, we want to get there pretty quick and solve for things faster way. So it's been a bit of a shift for us as well to think about it like that. And I would say it is starting to pay off in the sense that because I think there is empathy involved in it, there is compassion involved in it, and I'm bringing a bit of a softer aspect to it. There is a little bit more willingness to understand and experiment. So it's from both the sides. We are also talking to other downstream customers, and we are seeing willingness for them also to engage with us and go the distance. Again, I mean, there is an incentivization that is happening, and that's where the grant funding, I think, really helps, pre-competitive, where everybody can learn from it. And I would kind of say that for it to become a viable business model, which we are hoping it will, after the 4 years of intervention, our hope and our dream is that with this grant funding that we are doing, the adoption will be such that it can create center of sort of, excellence or expertise that can be adopted in other places and across the ecosystem. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Sort of building on that theme for Nishant, one of the things we've seen is when you have multiple grants and they're all at scale, there's still a push from Walmart to be innovative and not try certain things. So I'm going to ask you to put on your tech hat a bit because Nishant is also the head of sustainability for Flipkart. In all the programs, where do you see technology coming for farming the future? Because you've never pushed us too much. It's been much more, if the tech works for the farmer and they're willing to pay for it, then let's go for it. Most others would say, just give them the tech, right? So where's the thinking coming from, and how does that sort of have that impact and connection to livelihoods and inclusion in your overall impact?
So I'll perhaps start with an example, right? So about a couple of years ago, when I was starting on this journey in the development sector, I had visited this village in Anantapur in Andhra Pradesh with ICRISAT, who was our grantee at the time. And we were just talking to farmers and figuring out what's working for them, what's not working for them. And I had just moved into the sector, so there was a very heavy tech hangover. Right, so I was like, why not technology, and what works, what doesn't work, what if there is an app like this, what will happen? And one of the farmers actually showed his phone to us, and he was like, see, this app tells me to sow today, this app is telling me to sow next week and not this week, this app is saying that there is going to be rain this week, this app is saying that nothing is going to happen for a month, right? So who do I trust? And all of these are apps, and there are so many people who come to my village and take our data, collect the data, and then they keep on sending WhatsApp messages, they keep on sending SMSs, they keep on projecting and giving advisory, and I don't know who to trust really, right? And that kind of guides our philosophy to say that, tech need not work everywhere, and tech is just a tool essentially at the end of the day, right? Tech is not the solution. Tech is a part of the solution, and wherever it works, but you can't force fit the manifestation of tech onto an ecosystem which may or may not necessarily trust it, right? And over the last 2.5 years, what I have personally also learned is that what Chetna ma'am was saying just now, that listen, right? Listen to the communities, what do they need, what are they saying? And that's where we observed what are the specific needs, and I'll just give a few examples, right? So one is that pure technology, only technology has its own challenges because it comes with deficit of trust. It comes with deficit of a face in front of the farmer. So when it comes with a face in front of the farmers, it's a lot more palatable, right? And like a broken record, I'll just go back to FPOs. FPOs have started becoming a node of distribution of technology as well. Because when FPOs have evaluated some technology with expertise and then they expose that technology to the farmer knows that a certain level of validation has happened. And if at all I face a challenge, there is somebody who I can reach out to and validate, right? Also, it's very, very critical to understand that for us sitting in cities to experiment with tech doesn't come at a cost. Whereas for farmers, where the land holding is so small, there is obviously going to be risk aversion because they know that their entire income for the year can get wiped out if they actually end up taking up something which they shouldn't have, right? So there is a lot of risk aversion, and rightly so. So you need to back it with a lot of conviction at a FPO level, at a program level, to understand what technology will work, what technology needs to be done for FPO, and what essentially needs to go to the farmer. So, for example, one of the things that we worked with TechnoServe itself was the coffee value chain in Andhra Pradesh. There, the technology is about traceability, right? And there is a need for traceability because there is demand for specialty coffee, there is demand for organic coffee, and for organic coffee certifications, for Rainforest Alliance certifications, for multiple such certifications, you need to establish traceability back to the farm level, and you do need the technology. But the good thing is, in such a case, that the buyer is more likely to pay for the implementation of the technology, right? Because the buyer knows that there are customers, perhaps a lot of us sitting in this room, who are willing to pay more if we know that this is certified organic coffee, right? So not burdening the farmer with the cost of technology is very, very critical because the farmer doesn't have the margins to do so, right? Another example of how we are leveraging technology, and this is actually to the farmer level again, is with precision development. What they do is that they have figured out a technology, they are experimenting with technology where the advisory is not just at a district or a block level, the technology, the advisory can be provided at the farm level. Because we know how big our blocks can be, how big, large our districts can be, whether advisory at a district level does not translate to precise, accurate advisory at a farm level. And so a lot of this technology is coming in into that shape. Another example of technology is also to say, how can we help the FPOs manage their shareholders more effectively, right? And that requires data collection. That requires FPOs to know where all are their shareholders situated, the farmers are situated, when are they going to harvest, how much produce is going to come in available at what point in time. And we were working with Digital Green a couple of years ago where they showed that just by this awareness, just by leveraging this knowledge that this much of chili is going to be available within these couple of weeks, they were actually able to negotiate much, much better with the markets. And the cost, the value realization went up by 10% or so, right? So there is definite advantage of using technology, but we have to understand who can and who cannot leverage technology, and in what shape and format can the technology be leveraged. And that's where we have now been very cognizant of saying that technology is not a mandate on every project, right? We will do projects which focus on technology alone, but there the idea would be to learn what is working, to understand what's working and what's not working, and then expose that to the rest of the ecosystem. But every implementation program cannot have a all one-size-fits-all sort of a technology that you have to leverage, that you have to use. And that's essentially what I would say that is our outlook towards technology here.
Thanks, Nishant, for that. And I think we see across most programs traceability and blockchain taking a very central role, and primarily because you can have somebody else paying for the cost of it. But sticking to a little bit on the theme of technology, I just wanted to understand a little bit on how you see government looking at technology for farming, and this idea that there's a lot of information on smallholding farmers, aggregate, in various different levels, but it's not coming together for effective, quick policy change, right? In the programs we implement, because we're not reliant on that, we can course correct. If there's something we notice, we change it. But when it's coming from a side of the government where you had alluded earlier saying, we're not unpacking what's working quickly, how do you see the government being able to, and plus, which other stakeholders do you see being able to play that role here?
I must say that, Nishant, that was perhaps the most refreshing take I've heard on the question, and I think I really echo a lot of what you said, and we do work with a lot of state governments on this question of, digital in ag, and I often walk into the room saying, I want to hold myself back a little bit because digital alone cannot be the solution. And I think even if you look across categories, right? I mean, the same farmer, if you look at financial inclusion and penetration and use of, payment solutions is completely different from ag tech, right? And I think we should all reflect perhaps, what is the value and what is the simplicity of some of that and that context. But sorry, coming back, I think, to your question, which is how is, how is all of this data coming together for government? Is it not? Look, I think there were two parts, right? I think one is just government and technology and government and data, and maybe I'll try and be brief on both. I think at least some of the states that we're working in right now, I think are starting to recognize that there is a role that the government will have to play to be able to unlock technology access, right? And I think that role is in a few different ways. I think one is this piece around trust, and I think there's a recognition that there will need to be a phygital, sorry for the buzzword, but ecosystem around the farmer. And perhaps the entire, extension agency needs to be enabled itself in order to be able to enable last mile, digital access and adoption, right? So how do you actually as government think about your role, both in terms of, the people ecosystem that you put around, some of this technology to drive adoption, and it may not be a long-term permanent solution, but there has to be some initial uptake that is facilitated. I think the second is data, right? And we're now starting to see I was looking at an example of Telangana, which has, put in place its own agri-data stack, and I think that is different from what the central government is doing. The central government is definitely creating the right foundational registries of who the farmer is, what the farmland is, and what crop, they farm. But I think states like UP, Telangana, I read about Kerala yesterday, are now also starting to say there's a lot of data that actually sits in silos, and a huge part of the government's challenge is that the data sits with various departments, so soil health, is somewhere else, water and moisture is somewhere else, weather is somewhere else. A lot of it sits, in government, digitized, not digitized. A lot of it sits with the private sector. So I think the progressive states that we're starting to, see are putting together, mechanisms to bring a lot of this data together and create access both to other government agencies, but also the private sector to be able to leverage and build on it to increase the relevance of a lot of the technology and the solutioning, right? How much of that is feeding back into, government systems and policy? I think there is, in some spaces, we're seeing it more. So I do see, for example, the fertilizer ministry and department, has innovated, at least in terms of this PM Pranam scheme. Let's see how it gets operationalized, but there is a recognition that, the subsidy is going a certain place. There are, places where efficiency is being built in, and this, scheme is, I think, a pretty good example to say that, if states can save, we will give you 50% of the saving to deploy into better places, right? So I think some of that is feeding back into policy. But I think putting the data, in place, and I think the private sector has a great role to play in terms of being able to share back that data, right? And maybe some of the private collectives and collaboratives that are coming together can make that data available and accessible, not just to the private sector, but also the government.
Okay, perfect. Now, moving to Chetna, two things, just to build on the importance of inclusivity in gender, but not specifically only that. One of the questions Nishant had also asked us at one point was, is there a difference for access to finance for an individual woman versus a FPC that is woman only? And I hadn't got the answer, so I figured I'd use this opportunity to get that answer. And the second is much more of a nuanced question. You do a lot of training on finance, a lot of workshops for women. What do you see as their journey in it? Do they quickly understand, adopt? Is the barrier in the home a little bit more? And I'll give you an example. We had in one of our programs ensured that the income goes directly to the woman's bank account. But what we noticed for the first 1 or 2 years was it didn't give her any agency. She was not actually accessing it, but she did start understanding how much money is coming in. So at the end of 2 years, there's that little bit of movement, but some movement. And because you work with them, if you could just tell us a little bit about that journey, because we all need to be patient in this and not just think, oh, I did a training, they're going to go home and adopt it, because we don't do that ourselves, right? So,
Thanks for asking me this question. So first part is easier, which you talked about FPOs and individual. I do think, and I really think, Nishant, that when we talk about women FPO and then financing to women FPO, what are the areas, right? NABARD has such a big schemes, like Mandeshi runs these cold storage, warehouses, soil and water testing center. Now such things, individual farmer, marginal farmers are not going to be able to do it. You need everything. You need access to capital. You need little bit of subsidy. You need hand-holding for the land, like, when you have to set up the warehouse and cold storage. And you will be surprised that for warehouse and cold storage, farmers were ready to give their land. Can you imagine the sacrifice? They are ready to do it at the village level is huge. If they see that commitment and it is going to help them, so that in that collectivization, I think when women FPO and come, then our product has to be these types, like warehouse, receive financing, cold storage, receive financing, water and soil testing center, where the women farmers or marginal farmers will come actually and pay for it. And all these projects operationally, they are viable. That is another thing, where FPO also can become viable. So that is at FPO level. At individual level, I think if these things work out very well, I mean, banks just need to design the product based on the cash flows of farmers. I mean, when I say cash flows, it is not now only crop. Farmers, marginal farmers have become so innovative that you get vegetables in Mumbai from Nashik on the same day which has been harvested one day before. And you get a fresh vegetables from there, from Kolhapur. So if you understand the cash flows of farmers and when they get money, You have to design the product in such a way. And as a banker, be innovative, be a risk taker, you do it. I'm just proudly sharing that, Krishnan, 500,000 women have taken loan. Average amount is not more than 5,000 rupees. But they have been able to buy the houses in their own name. They have property today. After 2.5, 25 years, you find thousands and thousands of women are owning the property. So nobody has given them subsidy to own that, right? So that is possible at the individual level. Now coming to the second part of training, I feel the first thing I've learned from women, and again I will here give you the example, that when we were conducting the training on digital literacy, financial literacy, and how you have to remember PIN code and everything, I remember that when we did this training program, one of our women said that, you are talking about PIN code, but find some other solution. And we said, we'll teach you. We'll make sure that you remember the PIN code. It's fine. They said, no, find something else. Then they said, what about the thumb, which means biometric, right? And then when we use that for opening the digital wallet, now, of course, you have these face tracing, but at that time, 10 years before. And when women used it, you know what they said? They said, मुझे मार के पिन नंबर तो कोई भी ले लेगा, लेकिन मेरा अंगूठा कोई नहीं चुरा सकता है. See, this is they are so intelligent, the wisdom is there, ancient intelligence is there. So I feel that while training, it is very important for us that what are we delivering to them? Is it going to work for them? And I think that once they understand that, and I'll end with here that, one thing when we started our soil and water testing center, we saw that when women actually, there are techniques, I'm not going into the details, but when our soil Sakhi gets the soil from the field and then they talk to women, they know and they tell our soil Sakhi that actually take that sample also from our farm because that soil is really very dry and we want to know what to do, right? So it's how do you design your training program? It has to be very interactive. It has to be that is it going to help them in their farm, in their field, and are they going to get the outcome in the field, which is going to change their product and the cost and plus profits. I think also when we talk about farmers, we have to talk about profit. We have to just take care of profit. They will take care of our children, food, climate, everything. If we are sensitive about farmers' profit, farmers are already sensitive about planet.
Well, I say a big thank you to everyone. I don't need to summarize because hopefully all of you listened. What I will do is one final question for the panelists. Short, when we say farming the future, two things. One is, are you positive, hopeful, confused, or negative? Okay, any of those? And what's the one thing you think people should be paying attention to when we think about farming the future?
I'll answer the second question first. I think farmer livelihoods and profit is what we have to keep at the center, and I think everything else will follow. I couldn't have said it any better. I'm very bullish, and I continue to remain bullish, so let's see how we can collaborate to make it actually happen.
With the room here, packed room still here till lunch, I'm so excited. I just say that, just go to the farm, meet those women. There is so much AI in them, ancient intelligence is them, right? Just do that.
I echo everything you said. And when a woman has that economic power, the kind of decision that she makes for the food that is being fed in the family, the education of the children, everything changes when that agency comes to that women. So that's a great impact of what you just said. So I would just say invest in building resilience, innovative management, and making sure that the farmer is earning the profit that they're meant to earn. Thank you.
It's very difficult and it's very unfair to be the last person to summarize, right? But yes, of course, I think it's a leading question. It is, there is no other answer but to say that we are all very, very bullish about it. And we are also extremely happy and privileged to be part of this journey where we are at that stage where we are seeing very, very possibly bright outcomes in the very immediate future. So very excited, very fortunate to be part of this ecosystem at this point in time. One thing that I think we should all keep in mind is that the benefits of everything that we do should be democratized. Democratized not just with respect to gender, but for a collective, it should be democratized to all its shareholders, irrespective of the land holding and irrespective of every other cut that we make. So yeah, that's that. Thank you.
Thank you. And just to close, at least from my perspective for Farming the Future, I just want the people in this room and even who you talk to just understand a couple of things, right? I'd seen a show where they said that if you eat anything enough or new, there will be an inquisition about it. They will say, where is this from? How was it made? Unfortunately, we don't take the inquisition further to say, who's the farmer and what have they taken to do this? Because it takes 4 to 5 years to grow one cherry of coffee. It takes 7 years for a pomegranate tree. If you're not aware of that kind of labor and patience, then all we're going to do is design without understanding that level of effort. And in our day-to-day life, when your iPhone goes up by 5x, we accept it. Because somewhere we have looked at the ubiquity of it and forgiven it, but we've forgotten what is necessary, which is food. So I implore everyone here, please think about the food and the farmer at any point in a given day. It'll make it much easier to think about solutions. Thank you, everyone. Have been listening. Okay, this is a question on climate. So how has heat stress impacted cropping patterns? How do you see it in the future? And what can government FPOs and tech do? Now that's a technical question, so I don't know. Whoever wants to answer it, and I'll do one more question here. In reality, only 20 to 30% of FPOs operate as per the intended purpose. So what will be needed for FPOs to be sustainable, that number to go up to 50%?
I'll take the first question first. I think the climate is impacting everyone, and if you would have noticed, any one of you have plants at home, right? Like we saw what happened this summer, we saw what happened last summer. The same is happening to the crops. They are no different, right? At least at our homes, we can just cover them with something, but you can't do that in agriculture. So the climate impact is extreme, and it's now, right? So what's happening is that seasons are shifting. The rains, even when they are happening at much higher intensity and in shorter spells. So the water doesn't retain in the soil, right? And because of the intense heat waves, a lot of flower drop happens sometimes. Sometimes it happens because of the thunderstorms. So a lot of things are changing in the ecosystem, and there are a lot of research reports which are coming out to say that this much degree of temperature increase is likely to bring in the productivity decline by this much, and that varies crop by crop, right? And heat and water go hand in hand, right? So the need for irrigation is becoming even more extreme today. We are still a largely rain-fed agricultural economy, so that is hopefully going to shift to more of irrigated agriculture. So there is a lot of impact. There is also a lot of research being carried out to say, can advisory help in some way, right? So there is a mitigation part of it, and there is an adaptation part of it. Mitigation is that whatever you are farming, do it with better sustainable practices, and adaptation is that climate is already changing. what can we do to adopt to the changing climate. The latter and the former both are very clear, but we'll all have to be patient about it. One of the key things that is coming out very frequently now is that if you have climate resilient seedal varieties, it helps in both, right? So the more you grow millets, they are more heat resistant, they are more climate change resistant. There are a lot of new techniques which are coming in to say that temporary flooding can be taken care of if only you can do staking of various crops, right? So there are a lot of individual crop by crop researches which are coming out, which are detailing out the impact of rain, of heat, as well as some bit of adaptation of how can you tackle it. So that's on the climate part of it, and technology, of course, is very critical in this, right? In this research, as to figure out how much degree, what areas are more sensitive, what more areas are more drought prone, what areas are more flood prone, even within the same district. Not every farm is at the same elevation, so which farms are more flooding sensitive, and then exposing this reality to the farmer to say that this is what's likely to happen and this is the way you can tackle it. And technology will have to play a great role, because there is no way we can do it at scale without technology. The second aspect about the second question, which was how do you make FPOs more sustainable? I think 20% was a very generous number. But what we are seeing is that we have to be at it from multiple angles. One is that you're expecting a farmer to run MSME, right? You are expecting a farmer to run a business. Their expertise today rests in production, not in business management, right? So how do you create this ecosystem of expertise which is available to the FPOs, which they can leverage, which is a professional network of CEOs, professional network of chartered accountants who can help these FPOs to become more sustainable business entities. The other element is for all the corporates, etc., to say that can we increase our sourcing from these FPOs so that there is enough demand for these FPOs to actually sell to, because market access remains a huge struggle, and with that is linked to which is access to finance. So access to finance and access to markets remains one of the biggest challenge why FPOs are struggling today, because FPOs need more working capital loans so that they can actually find buyers. They can also respond to the immediate payment needs of the farmer. So you need working capital, and how can we bring down the cost of capital to these FPOs is extremely critical. And once that is solved, you will see markets opening up, and we all will have a very active role to play to say that, am I sourcing from an FPO or am I sourcing from elsewhere, right? So that's a question, again, we will have to keep asking ourselves.
I just wanted to add to Nishant what you were saying on the FPOs. I think, two more things, right? I think one is we put 500 farmers together and say you're a company, and we expect that company to be able to do everything. And I think, at least in what we've seen, is the federated FPO model seems to be working quite well. I visited one in Yavatmal recently, Kanchani. They have 8,000 farmers, but it is the parent FPO with its shareholding that's then sourcing from a bunch of other FPOs, right? So is there a way to just reimagine the construct of the FPO to be more like a Sayadri or a Kanchani, which has evolved in that way? I think the second is on the CEO. I think no doubt that we need to think about where will the CEOs come from, who are they, how do we equip them better? But interestingly, the CEO, from at least what I know, doesn't have any shareholding in the FPO. And I think, can we actually relook at the scheme and its equity holding pattern to also create incentives for the person that's supposed to be driving the FPO, and maybe relook at some of that too?
I think thank you so much, and I hate being the timekeeper on such an amazing panel discussion, but whether we like it or not, there's just 3 takeaways, not from farm solutions, but for every solution. I think active listening is the key. I don't think it is restricted to farming. And what is in it for them is super critical. I think nobody can emphasize more than that. And whether we like it or not, patience. I think that was the key takeaway for us. And may I request Elorika from TechnoServe to felicitate the speakers, please. And we will be back here for the water security session at 2 o'clock. the reason why we are having to do it at 2 o'clock, although we are breaking only at 1:30, is that we have other plenary sessions that we will not be in a position to spill over. So if you can come back here at things. So yes, hello Rika. Thank you so much for being an amazing panel. वहाँ पे रख, उसमें रख.